Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks to my fellow Misfits, Matt Campisi and Tim Stevens. My name's Jerry Black. Let's get into it. And Tim, you have the quote for today.
A leader, like a shepherd, sends the fast, nimble sheep out front, so the rest will follow, not realizing that they're all being led from behind. So a leader leads quietly from behind. Nelson Mandela.
This week we've been talking about some of our, I guess I would say some of our favorite books or books that we felt have helped us with our own personal development in some way, shape, or form. Matt talked about a record producer. I talked about and using that guy's book to help you with creativity. My book was about luck. Tim is going to share a book today.
My book is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I enjoyed it. It was introduced to me in 2018 by a colleague at work. And for those who haven't read it, the book is about Jocko's experience in a city called Ramada in Iraq in 2006. He was a Navy SEAL. He was in a leadership position. And the book is filled with stories, scenarios of him in tense situations where he had to make split-second decisions. And as the book title says, him owning the outcome of those decisions, good or bad. And then he takes the time, similar to, I would say, David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me book. He takes the time after going through each scenario and explaining how his lesson learned ties into corporate leadership.
Yep.
Right. And again, owning situations and getting past that fear and that stigma behind admitting that although you didn't make a mistake as a leader, your team member did, and you're going to own it. And I'm gonna give you a kind of a one-liner that really stood out. And in fact, if you go and you search for a TEDx or TED Talk of Jocko, he actually mentions this one-liner. And how it goes is, if you don't take ownership of the problem will not get solved. And it sounds so simple, but it's so true. If I get really good at bobbing and weaving and dodging responsibility of a problem as a leader or even individual contributor, it may seem like the problem is just going to go away or it solves itself. It will come back, and it will likely come back in another form, and even worse.
What's your take on that level of ownership? Like, I guess, is that he says if somebody on his team made a mistake, it's because he didn't make sure they were trained well enough? Or, I mean, does he literally take responsibility for any problem ever? And how does that go? Or does he say the team needs to take responsibility? We as a team will take responsibility. What's the difference? How does that work?
Yeah. One of the scenarios he laid out was there was a situation where they were collaborating with the local Iraqi soldiers, which is something that most maybe don't know, right? It wasn't the Iraqi government that we were fighting during that time. It was actually insurgents in the Iraqi government. They joined forces with U.S. and other coalitions to fight terrorism. So one of the scenarios he lays out is they're in a tight situation where two of the Iraqi soldiers were actually killed accidentally by his team members, which is known as fratricide, friendly fire. And then one of Jocko's team members was critically wounded. So that gained a lot of attention. Brass higher ups demanded a debrief, and he was put on the spot, on the carpet, as they say, and he had to explain what happened. And it was really cool that his team members were in that room where he had to explain it, and they were actually standing up in the middle of it saying, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's my fault. My fault. But in the end, he was like, no, I own this. He didn't say that there was things out of my control, which I think is really cool. It shows his character. because I'm sure there was. He didn't pull the trigger and, kill one of the Iraqi soldiers. But he followed that,
Right.
to answer your question, Jerry. He followed that with, "Hey, we're gonna double down on our training. We're going to ensure that our tactics are more fine-tuned to avoid that situation where there is friendly fire." But knowing in the back of my mind and knowing in the back of everybody's mind in that room, I mean, it's just the business that we're in. Things are going to happen, just like in IT. If you tell one of your team members, "I need you to go make a change to the network," there's risk in just logging into the network devices.
Mhm.
We know that, right? And that leader has to carry that and know that he or she may be held responsible, even though their team member did all the right things.
I'd say this is one of the top
Yeah.
3 books that has shaped me and my framework or thought process on how to lead and do stuff with teams. And the idea to go in, because Tim, that's great level of just ownership. But the next tier down, Jerry, which I think you're going to, because you mentioned training, is there's no bad teams, there's just bad leaders. So if the team performs poorly, then the leader didn't do something to get them prepared for it. They didn't do the right training, they didn't do the right briefing. A lot of what he talks about in war is you have to think of plan B, plan C, plan D. If something goes wrong, that you could fall back and you thought it through. And if you as a leader don't think about the plan B, then people die. So that idea of overly preparing, overly thinking, overly training, overly communicating to everyone, I think easily could be applied to a networking team. Our teams is that as a leader, you have to think about what your team needs to be successful. If there's a poor performing employee, like, is that because that employee is just, doesn't have the mental capacity? If so, then you have to get rid of them, and that's the leader's job. Or you give them the training, or you give them the advice, or you give them the feedback, or you give them timely feedback in the situation so they know what they did so they can improve upon it. So that idea of just you as the team lead needs to be aware of everything about your team and make the decisions, do the actions to get them ready for it with training, prep, communication, and then plan A, plan B. Like your change control, Tim, like a lot of us go into change controls like, okay, if it doesn't work, we're just going to roll back. But, there are maybe, if we think a little bit harder on it, we could probably maybe model the change, or we could have a plan B so we can have some of the change be enacted if something doesn't work. So it's a great book, and I love that you brought that up.
Much of what we today call management is simply keeping people from doing the work they need to do. And I think like when you look at that quote, which is I think a lot of the time very true, and then you think about kind of that training, that extreme ownership, that same, and you put those two things, kind of layer those two things on top of each other. I think it's an interesting, how do I make sure that say my team is achieving everything it needs to be achieving? And if you throw, maybe everything that you believe management means, and instead say, okay, how do I take 100% ownership of this? What would I do? What do I need the team to do? Then how do I clear all the other stuff out of the way so they can just do that? That is good management, and it's derived from taking ownership of the situation in the first place, instead of saying, yeah, I got my TPS reports in, and we created this, from my perspective, right? We created this great project management timeline that we all know is never going to actually play out the way it's, we have it designed and right. So anyways, I think it's, you take these concepts and try and layer them. I think you can end up with some really thought-provoking what if and what about. But obviously, the lessons from the military, I think, are priceless. And we need to, I think it's great that you brought this up, Tim, because I think it's he clearly is a good speaker. And he's, just it's riveting to just listen to him, to read the words that he's written about the situations he's been in. It's really, really cool.
He's got such a great neck too.
He's got a huge neck.
Is just, it's veiny and it's strong, and he's got rid of that double chin at his age.
It's here. It's just,
it's and it just, his presence is like, even if he's not good at speaking, you're probably going to listen out of fear.
I'll tell you, like, I do worry someday that we'll have somebody like that in the audience, right? And like right front row,
Stone
looking
cold
at
Steve
you and
Austin.
just be like, yeah, and just be like, I'm gonna pivot and look over here.
Right, I'm
You,
gonna look
sir,
over
we're not
here,
having a
other
conversation
side
with
of the
you about
stage.
you or your spouse.
Right. I want to throw a
Whatever his name
caveat
is.
there on our topic of the day of the week. This week's topic was a great segue from last week. And I mentioned it last week. Your competence comes from studying doctrine. Your confidence comes from your level of competence. And your boldness and your assertiveness comes from the confidence that makes you marketable, right? It makes you valuable. But a step further, if you can strive to cultivate those three things: competence, confidence, and assertiveness, your leadership abilities are going to be magnified just that much. Now, I want to caution, especially some of our young listeners out there, not young in age, but young in the industry. Do not get into a leadership position and just admit guilt and fall on your sword in every situation. Don't do that. Okay. Don't do that, because unlike the military, the corporate world, the reality is why we exist is for profits, revenue, and taking care of customers. Okay. So over time, you're going to learn what I mean by that. It doesn't mean don't practice the things that we've discussed this week, but don't skip the competence and confidence and assertiveness, which is how you grow and how you're able to make those tactical decisions on where you own it and where you don't, because your tenure at a given job will be very short. Because the reality is, what we're discussing isn't a philosophy that everyone adopts and practices, even at the top.